Okay, so hello everybody on Facebook. I have no idea if it's working on Facebook because I've never done that. So I guess I will find out. Welcome to this mini class that we are going to be doing on the 10 Commandments. I have a lot of interest in this topic. For the last several months, I have been learning mostly through an organization called Project Aseret, particularly with Rabbi Shalom Schwartz, about how the 10 Commandments are not just 10 other mitzvot, 10 other commandments in Judaism, but that they serve as a foundation for the rest. That if we somehow understand the 10, we'll understand everything. And so I've been using that as a springboard to do quite a deep dive into the 10 Commandments as a research project. And basically what we're going to be doing here is just looking at some of my research findings so far. There are many different ways to approach the 10 Commandments, or the Aseret HaDibrot, or Aseret HaDvarim. I'm going to start with number 10, and there's a lot of different precedents for that, but basically it's the most human of all the 10, because it deals with issues that every single one of us face on a regular basis. So I want to just start, and feel free, of course, if you're in the video, to just ask any questions in the chat, and I'll do my best to answer them. But we're going to start with a little bit of a background as to why the 10, what's so important about the 10 in Judaism. Why do we all know about it in pop culture and yet don't know about it, don't talk about it? Historically, the 10 Commandments were said in conjunction every single day in shul. Today, it's something that some people say. There's been a lot of reservations about that. Some people say it's because the minute that we start to say that these 10 are more significant than anything else, then we undermine the rest of the Torah. There's a lot of historical reasons for it. But it is part of our birthright to understand the 10 Commandments. First of all, in tradition, the 10 Commandments have a direct relationship with Revelation, with Har Sinai, with the covenant that the Jewish people made with God 3,300 years ago. Everything stems from that. Hashem Elokeinu kares imanu bris b'chorev. God made a brit. So if we follow along here with the sources, I've tried to make it in such a way that you can see three different elements. You can see the Hebrew, you can see the transliteration, and you can see the English. So please feel free to follow along as we go. And the first source is just basically highlighting that Hashem made a brit with the Jewish people on Har Sinai, with everybody that is here, was there then. Anachnu ela po hayom kulanu chayim. People even beyond today that are there. Every single person, there's this special element of revelation that happened then, but even in the next generation, Moses is talking about how this revelation affects us and impacts us now. So the most important impacted experience for the Jewish people was the 10 Commandments. And in it, the preface to the 10 Commandments, we see also, and I'm sorry for the mistake there that it says Bereshit. It's not Bereshit. It is in Shemot. And it says, V'atem tiyuli mamleches kohanim v'goy kadosh. Before God gives the 10 Commandments, he says, everybody, you are to be a mamlechet kohanim, a kingdom of priests, and a goy kadosh, a holy nation. That's the mandate. Just like there are kohanim that serve in the temple for the Jewish people, who are meant to be a light unto our own nation. They're not better than anybody else, but they have more responsibilities. We are meant to be a mamlechet kohanim, a kingdom of kohanim to the rest of the world. And what is the message? What are we supposed to do? How are we supposed to serve? Well, that's where the 10 Commandments were given to us. This was the preface to the 10 Commandments. And a goy kadosh, a holy people, a nation. It's not just for the individuals, the kohanim as individuals, but for all of us as a nation. And we're not going to have time to get into how in Jewish literature this has been brought down, how important and how imperative the 10 Commandments are, how they contain the rest. There's many ways to look at that. But for now, we're just going to suffice it to say that revelation and our sense of calling and mission stem from the 10 Commandments. But today, I just want to focus on one. Lo tachmod. This is number 10. I'm going to go through very briefly the basic text, and then all we're going to do today is read a story in Genesis that highlights where I believe the source of this command or this Dibber comes from. So if we look closely here, we see that the 10 commandments were given twice, once at Har Sinai and once in the repetition of the Torah later in Devarim. So we see lo sachmod beis re'echa, lo sachmod eshes re'echa, va'avdo va'amaso v'sharo v'chamaro v'chol asher le're'echa. So the key word is tachmod, not to covet your neighbor's home, your neighbor's wife, their workers, the ox, the donkey, anything, v'chol asher le're'echa, anything that is your neighbor's, lo tachmod, don't covet it. And in Dvarim, we see it goes even further. It says, lo tachmod ve'lo tit'ave. So to keep it very simple, let's look at them as synonyms. We can do more of a deep dive on what the difference is between lo tachmod and lo tit'ave. And when I do further work on understanding and explaining the 10 commandments in that sense, we're going to understand that one of them might have to do with what we do going after our desires. The other one itself could be desire in and of itself, not desiring things that others have. But for now, just take a moment to embed those keywords into your mind, tachmod and tit'ave. Chet, mem, dalid, and for chemda, we're going to look into see how chemda is connected to that. But let's just keep those two words in mind. So essentially, on a simple level, the 10th commandment is telling us, don't covet, don't desire things that are not yours to have. And I want to make an argument that this entire story of the 10th Dibber, if you go back to the Garden of Eden, to Gan Eden, that is where we find the original story of tachmod, of coveting. So let's just set the frame. We know God created the world, God created human beings, everything in it. And once that was done, God says, Tov me'od, everything is very, very good. Very, very good to make. We then learn about God creating a garden. And if we look closely at the text, in Bereshit here, we see, Vayitzmach Hashem Elokim mina adama, God caused from the ground to sprout kol eitz nechmad lemar'eh v'tov lema'achal. Every single tree that was nechmad, keep in mind nechmad and chemda, tachmod, chet, mem, dalid, it's all the same word with different permutations. But the bottom line is God made the world in a certain way that things are desired. We desire things, and desire is good. God puts these trees. There's these trees, there's all the trees, and then there's these two particular trees, they're right in the center, and every single one of them is given the description of being everything is desirous for our eyes and good to eat. Of course, if it says kol eitz, then there's no reason not to include eitz hachaim b'toch hagan ve'etz hadas tovara, two that were mentioned in particular. So we just want to keep that in mind. God made creation such that it is beautiful to look at, and our desires are very, very, very important. And in fact, what's the command that God says? Vayitzaf Hashem Elokim ala Adam lemor, mikol eitz hagan achol tochal. You can eat from every tree of the garden. Every single tree of the garden you can eat. And so just from this, we learn that there are sensory desires and we have the ability to satisfy them, and we should eat our desires, if you will. But of course, the sentence continues that there are limits. Don't eat from the one tree in the middle. Don't eat from the one tree. So we know now that God created every single aspect of creation desirous for us, and yet we're not allowed to even have one thing. In one singular thing we're not allowed, and that thing we also can desire. We're just not supposed to eat it. So far, we see that everything was created. Nechmad lemar'eh, all the trees, betov lema'achal, desirous for our eyes, good to eat. And now a limitation comes in. Ume'etz hadas tov v'ra lo suchal mimenu, don't eat from it. So let's just keep that in mind. We can't, this is the first instance of we can't have everything we desire. So then we know life goes on. Adam becomes Adam and Chava. There are two people in the world, and they interact with this snake. And what does the snake say to Chava? Vayomer el ha'isha, af ki amar Elokim lo sochu mikol eitz hagan. The snake says to the woman, now this is a very strange sentence, but literally, it's literally a sentence that gets interrupted. It's af ki amar, even though God said, do not eat from any or every or all the trees of the garden. So first of all we know from what God said to Adam and Chava is don't eat from one tree. Now the snake is saying, did God say you couldn't eat from every single tree? It's a complete inverse of the word mikol. So far, one second. Okay, that's 2, 3. Okay. So what does Chava respond? Chava doesn't let the snake finish his sentence and says, "V'tomri shala nachash." And the snake, Chava says to the nachash, "Mi pri eitz hagan nochel." We can eat from the fruits of a tree. Umi pri eitz asher betoch hagan amar Elokim lo sochel mimenu v'lo sig'u bo hen tamusun. So what Chava is saying is, not you can eat from every tree, but yes, we can eat from a tree. We can eat from a tree, but we can't eat from the tree in the middle of the garden, which is kind of true. But there's also the Eitz HaChaim that was in the middle that they could eat from. So she discredits or discounts that, and then says that not only couldn't we eat it, but we can't even touch it, which is not true as well. So we're starting to get into the brain of what a person experiences when they want something and they can't have it. What does it become? It becomes the thing at the center. And it becomes the thing that we can't, not even can we can't even eat it, we can't even touch it. It's like it elevates, what Chava has done is elevated what is not available to being so catastrophic. It was the thing in the center, we couldn't even touch it. We're starting to see how the mind works when it wants things it cannot have. And this is where I think we see the first textual evidence of something related to the Ten Commandments in this story. So the snake doesn't say anything more to Chava, nothing. But what happens is, Vateira ha'isha ki tova eitz lama'achal. The woman, Chava, saw that the tree was good to eat. The ta'ava hu le'einaim. It was desirous for the eyes. V'nechmad ha'etz lahaskil. And it was desirous as a source of seichel, of wisdom. Now, I'm not going to get into, what does it mean to be lovely as a source of wisdom. The bottom line is, look what you're seeing here. Look on the left. If you see on the left, you see, lo tachmod eshes re'echa ve'lo tit'aveh beis re'echa. You see, don't covet the wife, your neighbor's wife. Don't covet your neighbor's home. The only other place in Tanakh that we see those two words right beside each other in close proximity, those two verbs, chet mem dalet and taf aleph vav he, is in this story and in the Ten Commandments. And you'll see this actually, and Rabbi Foreman from Aleph Beta always talks about this. Where do we see key words? Where do they play out in different parts of Tanakh? What's very cool about today is that there is ways to research these things that in previous generations you had to have basically a photographic memory. Today I can search the entire Tanakh for phrases and see how many times do they show up. And what's really cool is Rav Foreman does a lot of reverse engineering. So if you look at some far out midrashim, you can actually see how they relate they say certain things. For example, this week we see a whole thing about in the Midrash that I believe that the Har Sinai, the Ten Commandments, receiving it was like a marriage between God and Israel. And there's a whole way to see it that maybe it was a marriage. There's intertextuality that you can look at that lend credence to these ideas that are a bit far out there that seemingly don't have a connection to the text. But if we just look basically here, we see the words ta'ava and chet mem daled. And we see this only twice in all of Tanakh together like that. And so I believe, and as many of the learning sources bring out, that intertextuality is a way to have a commentary, one story on the other. The way Rabbi Foreman defines that is imagining that instead of being able to buy a place of real estate in New York City, which is very wide, because that's very hard to do, what you can do is build up. You can build up to the sky. And so what the Torah does is a lot of the stories are very terse. You know, the Tower of Babel is like 9 psukim, 9 sentences. And so how does the Torah layer? What is the first commentary of the Torah? It's other parts of the Torah. That's what creates vertical layers of meaning. Because not all the time is the Torah going to expand into in the stories themselves, but we can look at one story as a perush on the other. So we clearly are starting to see that Chava wants something that she is not allowed. She wants the one tree that is not available to her. And this is, of course, the essence of what is going on in Lo Tachmod, which we're going to get to a bit more. But let's just line up the perspectives a little bit of God, Chava, and the snake to see how they see things. So if you look on the right in the source that's being shown here, you see Chava's response. So it's not every tree. The word kol, if you look at kol in the snake to Chava, in the middle source here, you see mikol. And you also see mikol you see mikol from God to Adam, and you see mikol from the snake to Chava. God is saying everything's available to you but one tree. The snake is saying nothing's available to you. You can't eat from any of the trees. And what Chava is doing is minimizing what is available and maximizing in her brain what's not available. What's not available is that bright and shiny tree in the middle, not to mention that there was a tree of life there also. We don't even know for sure that the tree of knowledge of good and evil was right in the middle. It's in conjunction with when it said that the tree of life was in the middle, but we're not even sure. But let's just say it is in the middle. Well, there was another tree there that Chava doesn't mention. And also Chava mentions Bipri Eitz Hagan. It's almost like the fruit of one tree, eitz. It's just, we don't know what her perspective is. She's not seeing the full picture. And of course, you can't touch it. So those are the 3 perspectives lined up. And so just to clarify, look at the bottom here. God is eat from every tree. The snake is do not eat from any tree. And Chava is the fruit of one tree eat, but not the tree in the middle. You can't even touch it. And again, I just wanted to highlight, we see the distortion of Chava's sight in 2 ways. You see when God uses betoch, betoch hagan, das tovara, you see 2 trees there at least. And again, just to reiterate that Chava sees only one tree there. And also, not only can't you eat it, you can't touch it. So this very human-like experience, which eventually leads to Chava taking the fruit from the tree and eating it, and Adam doing it as well, what happens? The day you eat from it, you're going to die. That's what God says to Adam about not eating from the tree. So the very internal mechanisms that led Chava to eat from the tree is exactly what God says right after, is that's what's going to make you human. You're going to become a human being. What is the fundamental flaw of a human being? It's lo tachmod. It's seeing the fact that there are something that we cannot have. It's fixating on that one thing as opposed to everything else around you. coming into that, believing that distortion, that what you can't have is really the best thing, is really the most desirous. And what about all the other trees that were there? What happened to them? Did they enjoy them? Why couldn't they enjoy them? And so you see the patterns of connection between the two stories is that Lo Tachmod is really there to help us overcome the first human story, the story of wanting what we cannot have and desiring after it. So let's just recap as we finish this off, and hopefully I'll leave us with a couple of tips of how we can combat this part of ourselves that is always desiring after what is not available. So just wanted to show you again so you can all just take a look and see. Tachmod and Ta'aveh. It's all there. And what's so interesting, and I think so important for us to understand, is that desire itself is not bad. Desire itself is embedded into our senses. It's embedded into the very essence of who we are in ways that we have no control over. Our desires, of course, there's ways as human beings to channel them, and we can talk all about that. But it wasn't desire itself that was the problem. It was the placement of the desire. God made kol eitz nechmad lemar'eh, everything beautiful to look at, good to eat. It's just what's not yours. Your neighbor's wife, your neighbor's home, anything that belongs to other people that is not yours. So I think if we just take a look and compare the perspectives of humanity and God, we'll have a really good sense of what it means to live a life of lo tachmod. Based on the story that we just talked about, from humanity's lens and God's lens, we see humanity's lens is feel dissatisfaction for everything that I do have, for all that I do have to enjoy. And God's saying, deeply desire and enjoy everything in your domain, all that is yours to enjoy. What we learned from the first human beings is that what is not allowed is so much bigger and better than what we do have and what we are allowed. And what God is saying is what is not allowed is so small and minuscule compared to all you can have. There's a full garden. Everything is yours. There's one thing that's not yours. But the way we see it is that it's way more restrictive than that. What we have is not enough. There's just way too much that we don't have, that we can't access. And third, we won't be satisfied with what we have. That's why we need to go after things that we're not allowed to have. That's why the Chava gives in so easily to what the snake doesn't even just begins a sentence. He doesn't even go through sophisticated reasoning to convince her. It was just one sentence that was maybe even a fragment of a sentence, and that was enough for her to give in. Meanwhile, God's saying you will stay in Eden when you desire after what you are allowed to desire after. You can desire, deeply desire, with all of your senses, with all of your heart and soul and body. You can desire things, but desire what you have. And this flaw and the tragic version to end the story is that the humanity of Chava and Adam teach us here is, I will experience satisfaction, the Garden of Eden. I will be God-like, if you will, when I desire and partake in what is not mine. The forbidden fruit, stolen waters tasting so sweet. That's what we learn. And meanwhile, God's perspective is, you're going to lose the Garden of Eden if you desire after and partake in those things that are not yours. And I think the more that we contrast these two stories and understand what went wrong in the Garden of Eden, the more we can understand what goes wrong for all of us when we get stuck in the desire of things we cannot have, for things that are without our domain, that are beyond our reach. So just to recap, God's lens is to enjoy and deeply desire things in your life that you can have. What you can't have is so small and minuscule compared to all you can have. And that's what it's about. That's what being in Eden is about. desiring and then accessing what you are allowed to have, and otherwise you will be leaving the Garden of Eden. And so just a few meta lessons to leave us off here. It's that first and foremost, it's worth building a desire for things that we can have and enjoy. We think, oh, we just have it, therefore let's utilize it, let's do what we can. But there's a way to actually harness desire for things that we do have. We not only can have the things that we have, but we can actually have a tava, a desire for the things that we do have. The second thing that this is really, really important, and as I get more into the Ten Commandments at another time, especially lo tachmod, is if we have desires for what is not ours, that is normal. That is normal to have desires that are not for things that we cannot have. Now, there are levels that we can get to maybe where we, so to speak, are so unfocused with our eyes and with our minds and with our hearts on things we can't have that they lessen their power over us, and we don't focus on them, we don't ruminate about them, we don't worry about them and go after them in our minds for sure. But at the very basic, sometimes we desire things that we don't, that are not ours to have. All these things in front of us, they were beautiful and desirous to look at and to have, and yet it doesn't mean we go after them. Even if we do desire them, which is part of our humanity, we don't go after them. We don't chase after the things that are not ours actively. And third, what can make us most human is our ability to not go after what is not ours. This is what Bechira is all about. Having desires, okay, I understand that. But the snake, and I didn't get to this in this talk, but particularly, it's very interesting. If you look at the story and you go read it on your own and you look at the word to describe Adam and Chava, they were naked. Arum. They were naked and they weren't ashamed. That's one of the descriptions of them. And what's very interesting is that if you look, the next sentence after describing that Adam and Chava were naked before God and they weren't ashamed, this is before they did all the eating and everything, the next sentence says that the Nachash was Arum, Mikol Chayas HaSadeh. This is from Rav Foreman, that the Nachash, the snake, was also, well, it says the word for Arum there is translated as more cunning or more sneaky or clever than all the beasts of the field. But what's the word Arum? It's naked. From one perspective, something can be fully transparent and real and raw and naked. And from another, it can be deceitful. Those are the two of the same words, back-to-back sentences. For some reason, the English translates the first one with Adam and Chava as being naked, and the second one with the snake as being cunning. From the perspective of the snake, the snake just wants what it desires. That's what it's an animal. That is what a chaya is. It has a desire. It's programmed to have a desire, and it goes after what it desires. That's what it is. That's its makeup. From their perspective, from the snake's perspective, that's fully real and raw. That's naked. That perspective of you go after your desires because your desires are from God. That's what animals are. And what Chava and Adam have to learn and did learn and figure out is that perspective, even from one level as being fully naked and real and authentic, from the perspective of the human being, what the snake is deceptive. That's deceptive. Just because we want something doesn't mean we should go after it. Just because we have a desire doesn't mean we should do it. Just because Cain wants to kill Hevel doesn't mean he should. This is a fundamental part of the Ten Commandments. Lo tachmod. You're a human being. You have desire, but you don't go after things that are not yours. And that is, of course, what makes us most human. And I want to just end this mini class off with a quote, of course, from Pirkei Avot, which basically sums up what is going on here. Ezehu Ashir, who is rich, Hasamech Bechelko, who takes simcha in his chelek. Adam and Chava could not take simcha in their chelek. Their chelek was massive. What they wanted to take simcha in was what wasn't in their chelek. What we want to learn to take simcha in is our own stuff. It's ours. How can we increase our desire for the things that we already have in our life and move away from desiring after the things that are not ours? Having the compassion, the Rahmanas for all of us and ourselves, that this is not a simple task. There's a reason why this is one of the Dibrot. There's a reason why this was given at the revelation of Har Sinai. This is such a fundamental part of our humanity. And as I'll be able to go through in my research, we'll get into the fact that this Dibber has everything to do with all of the brachot in the Torah. If you look carefully, we are commanded, the Jews people are commanded to make hundreds, all the time there's blessings to make. What are the ingredients to making a bracha? You're not allowed to make a bracha on something that is not in front of you. You're not allowed to make a bracha on something that you're not about to experience. If you don't see a rainbow, you're not allowed to make a bracha on it. If you don't have bread, you're not allowed to say Hamotzi lecha min haaretz. If it's not Shabbat, you can't make Kiddush. You're not allowed to make brachas on things that are not in your domain, that you don't have in front of you. The entire system of brachas, you can argue, is an antidote to this lo tachmod. Because how many blessings can you make when you get married? Lo tachmod eshes re'echa. How many blessings can you make when you get married? I believe there are 7 blessings under the chuppah to make. You can't make those 7 blessings on somebody else's partner. The entire system of brachas are meant to increase our desire. We make a bracha before we partake in pleasure to increase our sense of it being chemda, of it being lovely for us. It's even in the Birkat HaMazon, Eretz Chem, I believe, someone correct me there. But we're trying to increase our sense of desire for the things we do have and decrease our sense of desire for what we don't. That is the blessing system. Making brachas is one of those antidotes. It also goes into our sense of uniqueness, that we are unique creations. Each and every one of us have things that are ours and ours only. And that's what we want to focus on what is ours. These are just a few of the branches. The goal is to be able to see within one Dibber, the klal, all these other principles and ideas and ways to improve ourselves. For myself, it's just the beginning of my learning in this area. Please give me feedback, criticism on my analysis on the story. I'm sure there's ways that I saw it that isn't totally correct, but I just wanted to open the conversation that so many of these Dibrot are going to be able to be seen through stories in the Torah. You could go through in almost every single story. You go through Yaakov and Esav, you see Yaakov wants what's not his. Yaakov is named after grasping after the heel of Esav. Already you see in the womb there, he wants what he cannot, what is not his. There's a whole sense of this running through all of Bereshis. And that's why it is such a fundamental, that's why it's the 10th Dibber. You can see so many people, Vilna go and talk about that this is so much of like the essence of the Torah, if you will. I don't have time to go into all of that. So I will leave it at that. I'll stay open for a minute or two for any questions or any thoughts people have on this topic. But yeah, thank you all for coming.
Do you want to? Reb Noach.
Artie.
Shkoyach.
Thank you.
For tying so many limuds together. Loy Sachmad, Gan Eden, Brachas, Perkei Avos, a beautiful thread. And David and I are sitting together and really appreciate this class. I've got one question for you.
Yeah.
So what you said about Chava is that they had everything they wanted in Gan Eden. And the only limitation was, and I forget the pasuk you quoted, but the only limitation was eating from the tree in the midst of Gan Eden.
Right.
And I assume that tree was the Eitz Hadas.
Right.
Right.
Well, it was both. There were 2. The actual pasuk says that the Eitz HaChaim was betoch hagan. It says Hates a time achaim betochagan ve'etz hadat tov v'ra. It says right after that maybe it was also there in the middle.
Okay. So what I've learned from one of my teachers, Barry Bank, and I think he's on tonight's class, is that the Eitz Hadas is symbolic of the etrog. And so when you say they were limited to the one tree, the esrog, we know, is the most beautiful fruit.
Yeah.
The essence of sukkahs, right?
Right.
It's the heart of the matter. So when you say that Chava was just limited to that, I mean, that's a pretty huge limitation.
It on one level, sure. Pre-Eitz Hadar, right? I mean, that'd be interesting to see where that whole thing comes from. But if you just look at the text itself, there was all these trees that were nechmad lemar'eh, to be beautiful to look at, v'tov lema'achal. We see maybe there was something, you could be right. Maybe there was something that was most beautiful about that one. But is it also possible that what was most beautiful about it was that it wasn't available? Is that a possibility?
Well, the forbidden fruit, yeah.
The forbidden fruit, right? Is that yeah? It's
so is it subjective? Is it a subjective forbidden fruit, or what I'm suggesting is it might be objectively a forbidden fruit?
No, I'm saying for sure you could say it's an objective forbidden fruit, but maybe its perception of it being the most beautiful within ourselves is partly because it's the thing that's not allowed. Maybe you're right. Maybe that was the most objectively beautiful. If you were to interview, 20 people, they would all say, this is the most beautiful. That's a good question. I don't know. But it seems from the text that there was so many things that were beautiful. And what wasn't allowed was just one thing. And it's not clear exactly whether that was the most beautiful, but it's something to think about. But I definitely think that from the psychological level, it's probably that what is most beautiful in that perspective is what is not allowed. That's the most enticing, but I don't know. I'd love for Barry to send me that.
I think the proof of what you just said, Noah, is that since the Torah takes pains to not mention the identity of the fruit, that means the identity of the fruit is absolutely irrelevant.
Right. True. So it's not even about what it was, because whatever it was, it would be the best to them in their head, in the way that they see things. I totally disregarded in this story just what they all mean on an individual level. I felt that was way beyond, but it is an interesting thought. What was it, and was it more desirous or not? But either way, God willing, we should continue to be besimcha in our chelek, and in a way that rectifies both. Well, that fulfills the Dibber lo tachmod, and hopefully fixes that original banishing of Gan Eden, which was going after what was not ours to have in the first place.
Amen.
Okay, so thanks everybody for coming on, and till next time.
Great class.
Great.
All the
Excellent.
best.
Beautiful. All the best.